Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video and commenting where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into these chilling stories. It all started after I left the gym one evening. I'd been at the gym for about an hour or so, getting in a good workout, and I had a pretty decent sweat going. I was feeling good, like I'd hit my goals for the day. The sun had just set, and while the streets weren't exactly empty, it was getting quieter. A lot of people had already gone inside as the storm started rolling in. I live in Texas, so by this time, the heat of the day had started to cool down, but the humidity was still a nightmare. I was looking forward to getting home, taking a shower, and just chilling for the night. As I was walking out of the gym, I noticed the sky had gotten darker faster than I expected. The weather here can change quick, especially in the summer, and within minutes I saw lightning off in the distance. And then it started. The rain came down in sheets, like someone flipped a switch. It was one of those storms where the sky goes pitch black and it feels like the whole world's about to flood. My apartment wasn't far from the gym, just a few blocks away, but the rain was coming down so hard I knew I'd get drenched before I even made it home. So I figured I'd take a shortcut through the alley. There's this alleyway that cuts between two buildings on the way home. It's not the best lit place, but it's quick and gets you out of the storm faster. I've walked through there dozens of times. It's not the kind of alley where you expect something crazy to happen, you know? Just a place to duck out of the rain for a minute. But this time, as soon as I stepped into the alley, something didn't feel right. I didn't know exactly what it was. Maybe it was the way the storm made everything sound distant, or the fact that the lights overhead flickered and buzzed. But there was this weird tension in the air. Still, I kept walking. The rain was pouring so hard now that the alley was starting to flood at the edges, and the wind was howling like crazy. I pulled my hoodie up over my head and kept moving as fast as I could. Halfway through the alley, I heard something. Footsteps. At first, I thought it was just the sound of the rain hitting the pavement. But then I realized there was a rhythm to it, steady and deliberate. Someone was walking behind me. The alley's pretty narrow, and there wasn't anywhere to hide or step aside. I kept walking, trying not to think too much about it. Maybe it was just someone else trying to get out of the storm. But then the footsteps grew louder. They weren't just behind me. They were getting closer. At that point, I started to feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I quickened my pace, but so did the footsteps. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a shadow in the rain. I couldn't make out any details because it was so dark, but there was definitely someone back there. The figure was moving fast. I started to walk even faster, but my heart was pounding. I didn't want to look like I was panicking, but every part of me was screaming to get out of there. The footsteps didn't stop, though. They were still right behind me. I could feel them getting closer with every step. By this point, I was almost to the end of the alley where the streetlights started to light up a little more. I figured I'd get there and be safe, but the fear was making me do stupid things. I could hear the person's breathing now, heavy and labored. It didn't make sense with the storm raging around us, like his breath was louder than the rain. It was unsettling. I don't know why I did it, but I turned around to face him. I think I was hoping maybe I'd just spook him off, make him think I wasn't scared or something. But what I saw made my blood run cold. There was a guy, maybe in his late 20s or early 30s, standing about 5 feet away from me. He was drenched from head to toe, just like I was, but the way he was staring at me, I couldn't look away. His grin wasn't just unsettling, it was predatory. And before I could react, he moved so fast, closing the distance between us in a split second. He lunged. I didn't think. I just reacted. I ducked to the side and shoved my shoulder into his chest, knocking him off balance. For a moment, I was off my feet, stumbling forward, but adrenaline kicked in. I didn't think, didn't stop. I turned and bolted out of the alley as fast as I could, not even caring about the rain hitting my face. I was just focused on getting out of there. I heard him cursing behind me, but I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if he was coming after me again. I just kept running, my legs burning, the rain blurring everything around me. When I reached the end of the alley and ran out into the street, I finally stopped, gasping for air. My whole body was shaking and my mind was racing, trying to piece together what just happened. I didn't stop running until I was safely inside my building, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept imagining that guy's eyes, that sick grin, and I just couldn't shake the feeling that something worse had been about to happen. The next day, I found out from a neighbor that a guy had been arrested in the area for attacking someone a few weeks earlier. Apparently, he had been stalking people around that part of town, following them through alleys and back streets. The police said he had tried to grab a woman not far from where I had been, but luckily, she managed to get away. When I heard that, it hit me. That guy I had seen last night, he was the same guy. I don't know what he was planning on doing, but I'm just thankful I got out of there. Now, I never take shortcuts, and every time I walk near that alley, I can't help but remember how close I came to something much worse happening. So yeah, I'm telling you this because you never know who's lurking around. Stay aware of your surroundings and don't trust that empty alley or shortcut, no matter how familiar it seems. I live in a small house on the outskirts of a town in Texas. It's pretty rural, and my neighbors are few and far between. It was a Thursday night in late October when it happened, right in the middle of one of those terrible thunderstorms we get down here. It had been raining all day, but around 8 p.m., the storm really picked up. The wind was howling, and the rain was coming down in sheets. It was one of those storms where you could hear the trees creaking and groaning outside like they might snap any second. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then the lights flickered and went out. It wasn't unusual for power to go out during storms like this, so I wasn't too concerned at first, but obviously it's always a bit unnerving when it happens, especially when you live alone. I figured I'd just ride it out. I grabbed some candles from the kitchen drawer and set them up in the living room. There's something kind of peaceful about the soft light of candles, you know? Almost comforting when everything else feels so chaotic. So I sat on my couch, listening to the storm and just letting the quiet settle around me. I wasn't even watching TV or anything, just scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself. About an hour or so passed, and the storm was getting worse. The wind was so strong I could hear it slapping against the side of the house. I could see the tree branches swaying wildly outside through the windows. Then I heard something. It was faint at first, but I heard the distinct sound of footsteps on the gravel outside. Crunch! Crunch! Shh! It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the rain. It was deliberate, like someone was walking up my driveway. My heart started pounding. There's no way anyone would be out there in this weather. The thought made me freeze. I got up slowly and walked to the window, trying to peek through the curtains without making much noise. I didn't see anything at first, but my mind started racing. Maybe it was just an animal, I thought. Maybe it was just the wind playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again. More steps. Now, I know for a fact there wasn't anyone living close by. My closest neighbor is a good mile away, so who would be out there in the pouring rain at this time of night? I backed away from the window and grabbed my phone. I didn't know who to call. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but I felt like something wasn't right. I checked the time. It was almost 10 p.m. The footsteps stopped for a second, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that it was just some random person walking by or maybe someone who was lost, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to make sure all the doors and windows were locked. I walked through the house quietly, double-checking everything. I even went into the back bedroom to make sure the window was secured. When I went back to the front of the house, I felt this cold, nagging sense of being watched. It's hard to explain, like someone's eyes were on me, even though I was alone. I took a deep breath and told myself to calm down, but then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The curtains at the front window were slightly parted. They weren't fully closed like I thought I'd left them. I hadn't touched them since I last checked. The wind was really picking up now, and I couldn't imagine how they'd moved on their own, especially since there was no breeze inside the house. I couldn't help myself. I slowly, cautiously pulled the curtains back, just enough to look outside. That's when I saw him. A man, standing right outside my window facing me. At first I thought maybe it was just some stranger seeking shelter from the storm. But as my eyes focused, I realized something even worse. He was staring at me. I couldn't see his face clearly. He was drenched from head to toe, water dripping from his clothes and hair, but I could tell he wasn't looking at anything else. He was locked on me. My stomach dropped, my heart was pounding in my ears, and I froze. My first instinct was to scream, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed with fear. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring back at him. It felt like an eternity. The rain was beating so hard against the window that it almost drowned out the sound of my own breathing. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there watching. And I swear to God, I could feel the weight of his gaze even though there was glass between us. I stepped back from the window, feeling like I was about to pass out from the tension. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the cops? Should I confront him? But something told me it wasn't safe. I grabbed my phone again, and this time I called my neighbor. The phone rang a few times before voicemail picked up, and I left a shaky message, not knowing what else to say. Hey, I think someone's outside my house. Can you call me back? Please. I'm freaking out. I was about to call the cops when the footsteps returned. This time they were louder, closer, heading toward the front porch. I knew this wasn't my imagination anymore. Someone was here, right outside. I pressed myself up against the wall, heart hammering, and waited. Seconds felt like hours. I heard the door handle jiggle a little, but it didn't open. I wasn't sure if it was him trying to get in or if it was just the wind messing with me. Then, all of a sudden, it stopped. The footsteps, the movement, everything. Complete silence. I waited a full 5 minutes before I dared peek out again. This time, the man wasn't at the window anymore. He wasn't anywhere in sight. That night I locked every window and door, even the ones I never used. I didn't sleep at all. I never saw him again. But I don't think I'll ever forget that moment. Seeing him standing there in the rain, staring at me, waiting for me to do something. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know if he was just watching or if he had something worse planned. My dog, a big, stubborn German Shepherd named Diesel, has always been pretty laid back. He'll bark if he hears something odd, but it's usually nothing. But this night, he was going absolutely crazy. It had been a pretty normal evening until the storm hit. It started out as just a few rumbles of thunder off in the distance, and I wasn't too worried. But before long, it turned into one of those heavy Texas storms that comes in fast and you can barely see past the rain. The wind was picking up too, and the whole place felt heavy, you know? It was the kind of storm that makes you stay inside, put on some music, and forget about the world. I was on the couch trying to watch a movie, but with Diesel barking nonstop, I couldn't focus. At first, I thought maybe he was just reacting to the storm, which he did sometimes. But as the minutes passed, his barking got more frantic, more insistent. He kept running back and forth from the sliding door to the kitchen, looking at me, then back at the window that faces the backyard. I figured he just saw something, a raccoon, maybe, or one of the neighbor's cats. But it was driving me nuts. Finally, I decided I'd go check it out. I grabbed a flashlight and walked over to the sliding door. Diesel was staring at the door now, whining and pawing at the glass like he wanted to get out. I opened the door a crack, and that's when the wind hit me. It was that wet, cold kind of wind that stings against your skin. "Diesel, stop," I muttered under my breath, but he wouldn't calm down. I figured I'd do a quick check and then go back inside. So I stepped out onto the porch, the flashlight beam cutting through the dark, the rain hitting me sideways. The backyard was just as dark as I remembered. Our backyard is kind of secluded, with a tall wooden fence and a bunch of trees that block the view from the street. But there's a small patch of grass in the corner where the fence isn't as high. I always hated that spot. It just felt like anyone could hide there and watch the house, especially with the trees shaking in the wind. I shone the flashlight toward that corner and I froze. I thought I saw something move, but I wasn't sure. It was dark and the rain was making everything harder to see. But then Diesel barked again, louder this time. He was still inside, but his bark sounded almost urgent, like he was trying to warn me. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine, my stomach twisted. Maybe it was just the storm messing with my nerves, but I had a bad feeling. My instincts were telling me something was wrong. I aimed the flashlight toward the corner of the yard again and took a few steps forward. And that's when I saw it. There was a figure crouched low in the bushes just beyond the tree line. I couldn't make out any details at first, just a vague shape in the darkness. But the beam of the flashlight caught something. Shiny. A glint of metal. I immediately froze. My heart started racing, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move at all, just stayed there, perfectly still, like he was waiting. I could barely make out the shape of a knife in his hand. The blade reflected the faint light of the flashlight, and it sent a jolt of pure fear through my chest. My mind raced. What was he doing? Why wasn't he running away? He had to know I saw him. The rational part of me was screaming to just go inside and lock the door, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, the flashlight trembling in my hand. And then the man shifted. It wasn't a big movement, just a slight turn of his head, but I could tell he was looking right at me. His eyes weren't visible, but the way he tilted his head toward me, it was like he was studying me, sizing me up. I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt like I might faint or throw up. Finally, I snapped out of it. I turned and bolted for the door, slamming it shut behind me, my hands shaking as I locked it. Diesel was barking like crazy inside, and I just stood there, trying to catch my breath, my mind reeling. I grabbed my phone and called 911, my hands still shaking. I barely managed to get the words out. I told them everything, the man in my backyard, the knife, how scared I was. They told me to stay inside, lock all the doors, and they'd send someone over. I felt like an idiot for not calling sooner. I mean, why hadn't I just trusted my gut from the start? About 15 minutes later, the police arrived. They did a quick sweep of the area, but the man was gone. I don't know how long he had been there, but the whole thing felt like a nightmare. I was relieved when the cops left, but part of me still didn't feel safe. I'll never ignore Diesel when he's barking like that again. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't checked the backyard. I don't want to think about it. I live on the outskirts of a small town in Texas, about 20 minutes from the city. It's a quiet, rural area, one of those places where the nearest neighbor is a good stretch down the road. I've always loved the isolation. It's peaceful. But sometimes when the weather turns, that peace starts to feel a little unsettling. I've always had a weird feeling before storms, like an electric hum in the air that presses against your skin. It's not something I can explain, but I know it. And that night, it was worse than usual. The clouds rolled in quickly, heavy and dark, swallowing the sky whole. The wind picked up like a freight train on the horizon, and the air was thick with that low rumble of thunder. I figured it'd be just another storm, a thunderstorm, nothing too bad, but something about it felt different. The air felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. I'd just gotten home from work around 6:30 p.m., and the house was quiet. Too quiet. The lights were off, and I could almost hear the silence pressing in from every direction. The kind of silence you get in the country, where the hum of traffic and city noise is miles away. I've lived in this house for a few years now. It's a modest two-story with a porch that creaks whenever the wind blows. Some might find it lonely, but to me, it's home. Sure, it gets a little eerie at times, but I'm used to it. Or at least, I thought I was. I threw my bag on the kitchen counter, grabbed a frozen pizza from the freezer, and popped it in the oven. While it cooked, I flipped on the TV. The Weather Channel was showing the storm front moving in, and I heard the announcer warning of high winds, rain, and possible power outages. Just a typical Texas thunderstorm, they said. Nothing to worry about. But the lightning was getting worse. It flashed bright and sharp, lighting up the whole sky every few minutes. Thunder boomed so loud I thought the house was going to shake apart. I remember thinking, it's just a storm, nothing to be scared of. By the time I finished dinner and sank into the couch with my plate, it was 8:30 p.m. and the storm had reached its peak. The wind was howling, rattling the windows, and the rain was coming down so hard it almost sounded like sheets of metal being thrown against the house. That's when I started to feel it. That nagging, crawling sensation at the back of my neck. It's hard to explain, but it was like someone was watching me. I kept telling myself it was just the storm messing with my head, but the feeling didn't go away. Every time the wind howled louder, I felt more and more like I wasn't alone. I looked around the room. Everything was fine. I checked the front and back doors. Locked. I checked the windows. Locked. I made sure the garage door was closed. Everything in its place. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in the house with me. Around 9 p.m., the storm had reached its worst. The wind was slamming against the walls, the rain was relentless, and the power flickered once, then came back on. It didn't seem like anything to worry about, but that sinking feeling in my stomach only deepened. It wasn't just the storm. Something was wrong. I was about to pick up my phone when I heard it. It wasn't the storm. It wasn't the wind or the thunder. It was a soft creak, the kind you only hear when someone steps on an old floorboard. It was coming from the hallway just behind me. I froze. My stomach twisted. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just the house settling. But then I heard it again, louder, a floorboard bending under pressure. Someone was in the house. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Panic surged up, but I forced myself to stay still, hoping the sound would go away. It didn't. I stood up slowly, praying that the floor wouldn't creak beneath me. My hands were shaking, and I had nothing to defend myself with except my phone. I grabbed it, checked the time, 9:15 p.m., and tried to figure out what to do. I could feel my breath coming faster, my pulse racing. I moved cautiously toward the hallway, my feet barely touching the floor, trying to make as little noise as possible. Every sound outside the storm seemed amplified, like the house was holding its breath with me. I reached the corner of the hallway and paused, trying to listen, trying to figure out if the sound was still there. Then I heard it. A door. A creak. The door to my bedroom. I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. Every muscle in my body screamed for me to run, but I couldn't. I was frozen. I could hear soft footsteps coming from the bedroom, slow and deliberate. I could feel my heart in my throat now, pounding so hard it almost hurt. I was shaking so badly I couldn't keep my phone steady, but I had no choice. I had to get help. Without thinking, I bolted toward the living room and dove behind the couch. My phone was already in my hand, and I quickly dialed 911, whispering, "Someone's in my house." The operator's voice came through soft but steady. "Stay on the line. Stay hidden." I did. I stayed as still as I could, every nerve in my body screaming at me to move, to do something. But I couldn't risk it. The man, whoever he was still moving around. I could hear his footsteps pacing the house back and forth. Every time the footsteps came closer, I held my breath, hoping he wouldn't find me. I couldn't even hear the storm anymore. All I could hear was my own heartbeat racing in my chest. The seconds felt like hours. I could feel the air shift when he got too close. I thought I could almost feel his presence right behind me. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of a door opening. The front door. He was leaving. I didn't move. I stayed crouched behind the couch, my breath shallow, waiting for him to go. I couldn't risk making a sound. He was still out there. Minutes later, I heard sirens. Relief washed over me, but the man was already gone. The police arrived shortly after, but they didn't find him. He'd already slipped away in the storm. They told me something about how thieves often strike during bad weather, using the storm as cover to move undetected. They told me to take extra precautions from now on, to lock every door, every window, to install cameras or an alarm system, things I never thought I'd need living in the middle of nowhere. I still check the locks several times before bed, and I know now that when the storm comes, it's not just nature you need to watch out for. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.